If you asked Sorrel later, and a great many people did, at length, and not at all kindly, she would tell you that the ruin of the royal binding was, when you followed the logic all the way down to the root of it, entirely the Alpha King's own fault. Consider it honestly. If Emmerich of Cairnwold had chosen his mate the way a king was supposed to, with treaties and councils and a great deal of tedious paperwork, there would have been no scenting at all, and so no scent for him to catch. And if he had simply bound the woman the whole court had already decided he would bind, the rite would have run its glittering course, everyone would have gone home mildly bored, and a certain scentless huntress would have climbed back down out of the heartwood's roots with no one the wiser. So, really, when you thought about it, and Sorrel had thought about very little else since, the whole catastrophe belonged to him, every last splinter of it. She, personally, had only wanted to watch. That was the thing no one afterward seemed willing to believe. Sorrel was not, by birth or by leave, the sort of creature permitted at a binding. She was hollow, scentless. Where every other wolf in Cairnwold carried a signature under the skin, grief and want and temper, all of it legible to anyone who cared to breathe, Sorrel carried nothing. To a wolf's nose, she simply was not there. The midwives had called it an ill sign the hour she was born, and the years had done nothing to argue them out of it. A hollow could not be scent red, and so could not be trusted, could not be courted, and so could not be matched, could not stand beneath the heartwood and be bound, because the heartwood answered scent, and she had none to give it. Which was precisely why she had climbed it. The heartwood was the oldest living thing in the kingdom, a black-barked giant whose roots had heaved the flagstones of the sacred hollow into a ring of low stone galleries, and whose crown had not been counted in leaves for 300 years. Sorrel had tucked herself into the deepest of those root galleries an hour before dusk, folded down small among the ferns where the torchlight didn't reach, and told herself she was here for no better reason than to see the one thing that had been denied her since birth, the joining she would never be offered. She had a poacher's stillness, and no scent to give her away. It should have been the safest hiding place in the realm. Below her, the hollow filled. 200 of the highborn in silver and dark green, the smell of them rolling up warm and complicated, and at the foot of the tree, the candidates in a pale row, 6 daughters of 6 great houses, and at their center, Lady Izora, of the Sunder Coast, whose match to the king was meant to not shut a truce 3 generations of soldiers had bled over. Isara was everything Sorrel was not, luminous, legible, a scent. So, the whispers went like snowmelt and bruised violets, and a lineage without a single hollow in it back to the founding. Then the king came, and the whole hollow drew one breath and held it. Emmerich of Cairnwold did not walk like a man being married, he walked like weather. Broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, unhurried, with a stillness that made the torches seem to lean toward him. Sorrel had seen him only once before, at a distance, a shape on a far balcony. She had not understood, then, what an alpha in his full weight did to a room, the way her own wolf pressed up under her ribs and wanted, absurdly, to be noticed. She dug her fingers into the cold root and told it to behave. The rite began the way rites do, with too much chanting and not enough happening. The priests called it the threading, and the story they told of it was older than the walls. That the heartwood had drunk the scent of every mated pair in Cairnwold's history down through its roots, and that when a true alpha stood beneath it and breathed, the tree breathed back, and pushed him toward the one throat whose scent would thread cleanly into his own. It was not a choice, they said, it was a recognition, a thing already true, only made visible. Sorrel had grown up on the edge of that story like a child with her nose against a bakery window, because a hollow had no thread for the tree to find. She was the one flaw the heartwood could not weave. She had told herself, climbing up here, that she only wanted to see the weaving done. She had not let herself finish the sentence, which was, just once, before they decide what to do with me, I want to stand near the thing I am not. The king moved down the pale row of candidates. He was meant to breathe each of them in turn and let the old blood in him answer, and then stop where the answer was loudest, and everyone already knew where he would stop. He passed the first three without a flicker. For one gliding golden moment, Sorrel let herself believe she had gotten away with it, that she would watch the whole beautiful machine run to its end and slip out the back of the world unnoticed, the way she slipped out of everything. He reached Isaura. He bent his head to her throat. The hollow leaned in as one body, and the king went still in a way that had nothing to do with snow melt or violets. His head came up, not toward the bride. Away from her, up and to the left, into the dark tangle of roots where a scentless girl sat certain she could not be found. His nostrils flared. Something crossed his face that Sorrel, even at that distance, even sick with dread, could read, plain as a struck bell. Not suspicion, recognition. "Stop," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The chanting fell off a cliff. 200 faces turned to follow the line of the king's stare straight into the roots, straight into the shadow where Sorrel had folded herself small, and she felt the exact instant she stopped being invisible, felt it the way you feel a floor give way. Someone screamed that the right had been broken. Someone else was already saying the word, hollow, hollow and omen in the roots, and the sound of it moved through the crowd, like cold water finding a crack. A priest lunged for the king's sleeve, and was shrugged off without a glance. Lady Isaura stood abandoned, at the foot of the tree, with her bared throat and her snow melt and her 3 generations of clean blood, forgotten as completely as last winter, and Sorrel would have felt sorry for her if she had owned a single scrap of feeling. The king stepped down off the sacred stone. Toward her, past his stunned bride, past the priests with their mouths open, past every law that said a hollow found at a binding was an omen to be put down before the ill of it could spread. He crossed the hollow with his eyes fixed on the one place in the world she had believed no one could look, and the closer he came the less he looked like a man in the grip of a right, and the more he looked like a man who had come here already knowing exactly what he would find. When he was near enough that she could see the pale gray of his eyes catching torchlight, near enough that his voice would carry to her, and no farther, he opened his mouth to say the thing that would decide the rest of her life. Sorrel did not wait to hear it. She ran. She went up and out through the crown of the heartwood, the way she'd come in, root to burl, to the broken wall behind, and dropped into the black of the outer woods before the first shout finished, leaving the first throat. This, at least, she was built for. A hollow left, no scent to follow. Let them send their trackers. Let them breathe the whole forest raw. They would get pine and cold and nothing of her at all. She ran until her lungs were glass, and the torch glow of the sacred hollow was a smear behind the trees. And then she ran a while more, because the alternative was to think about what she had just done. The hunter's lodge sat at the tree line where the king's forest gave way to the king's fields, and Sorrel had lived in it since she was 9. She came through its low door, still shaking, and found she was not going to be permitted the small mercy of a night to compose a lie. Pell was waiting up. So was Tamsin. So, it seemed, was the entire truth. Gods and rot, it is true. Pell was on his feet, the youngest of them, and the least able to keep his face shut. They're saying, Sorrel, the whole city's saying the king stopped his own binding and came down off the heartwood after a shadow, and half of them are swearing the shadow was a hollow, and I said there's no possible way that Sorrel would ever be so. Pell. Tamsin didn't get up. She was older, and she had gone very still in her chair, and she was looking at Sorrel the way you look at someone standing on ice. You can hear cracking. Let her sit down. I don't need to sit down. Sorrel's voice came out wrong. I need you to tell me it's not as bad as it is. Nobody told her that. Isaura's people have already left the city, Tamsin said quietly. Before midnight. Rode out without a word to anyone, which, you understand what that means. The whole point of tonight was to bind the Sunder Coast to the crown, 40 years of raids, and this rite was the stitch that closed it. And it came apart in front of 200 witnesses, because the king put his nose in the air and walked away from the bride. She let that sit. They're not going to say it came apart, because a hollow was in the roots. That's too small and too strange. They're going to need it to be a curse, or an omen, or a plot, something big enough to explain a king throwing away a truce. And when they go looking for the omen, Sorrel said, they find me. Tamsin didn't answer. That was answer enough. There's talk, though, Pell said, dropping his voice as if the shutters might carry it. From the keep men who drink down at the Fern. They say the king's been strange for a month. Cancelled 2 hunts, doubled the watch on his own wing, and wouldn't say against what. One of them swore there was blood, scrubbed off the west stair a fortnight back, and no one would name whose. He swallowed. They're saying he didn't stop that binding because of any omen at all. They're saying he was looking for a reason to stop it. And you just handed him one. That's tavern smoke, Tamsin said sharply, but she said it a beat too late, and Sorrel saw the same thought cross her face that had just crossed her own. That a king does not tear up a 40-year truce over a shadow in a tree unless the truce was already, quietly, something he wanted torn. It was the first thread of a great many she would spend the coming weeks pulling, and like most first threads it looked, just then, like nothing at all. Sorrel sat down after all. She knew the old law without being told it. Everyone did. A hollow found beneath the heartwood at a joining was ill luck given legs, and the elders had never written a gentle remedy for ill luck. At the very least, she would be cast out past the last waystone before dawn and struck from the rolls as though she had never existed. The old writs allowed for a great deal worse besides. She had grown up, being told she was that ill luck. She had simply never before given anyone the chance to prove it, and the worst of it, the part that sat under her breastbone like a swallowed stone, was that the lodge and the hunt were all she had. She could read a track 3 days cold. She could put an arrow through a running hare in bad light. She had made herself, splinter by splinter, into someone the pack could not quite afford to be rid of. And in 1 hour on a whim, she had thrown it all onto the fire, to watch a wedding that would never be hers. "You'll go north," said a new voice from the door. "Tonight." Alder filled the doorway, the way he filled every doorway. Big Gray at the temples, the master of the hunt who had pulled a scentless 9-year-old out of a ditch 2 winters after her own people had left her in it, and taught her everything her hands now knew. He crossed the room and put both his heavy hands on her shoulders, and Sorrow felt the sting behind her eyes that only ever came for him. "You didn't see anything," he said, low and certain. "You weren't there. I have 30 men who'll swear you were mending nets at this lodge all night, and I'll swear it loudest of the lot. We move you to the high camps before the sun's up, and we let the great and the good tear at each other over their broken truce until they forget a huntress was ever." The horn sounded at the lodge gate. Alder's head came up like a hound's. It was the wrong horn, the wrong hour, a single clean note where a search party would have brought a clamor. He went to the shutter and put his eye to the crack, and Sorrel watched every scrap of the plan drain out of his face. "That's not a search party," he said. His voice had gone strange. "It's one rider. No colors, no escort." He turned from the shutter slowly, and looked at her as though she had already become someone he had to grieve. "Sorrel. There is only one man in Cairnwold who rides to a hunter's lodge at midnight, with no one at his back." Outside, in the frost, the hoofbeats stopped. The door opened without a knock, because kings do not knock, and the whole lodge changed. Sorrel felt it before she had fully turned, the air pulling tight. Her own wolf snapping to attention under her skin, like a soldier caught slouching, every hollow instinct she owned screaming that something enormous had just walked in out of the cold. At the Heartwood he had been a shape at a distance, whether on a far hill. Here, in a low room that smelled of tallow and wet dog and mended leather, Emeric of Cairnwold was simply impossibly present, and the room was suddenly far too small to hold him. He looked around at once, unhurried, the drying nets, the banked fire, the three people frozen mid-breath, and then his grey eyes found Sorrel and warmed with what looked monstrously like delight. "There she is," said the Alpha King. "My runaway." Alder moved before Sorrel could. He put himself half in front of her, bowed low, and spoke fast and flat in the voice of a man laying his own neck on a block to keep another off it. The fault is mine, and the lodge's. If a hunter of mine strayed where she'd no business straying tonight, then the discipline is mine to give, and mine to answer for. Name it. But she is a good tracker and a better hand, and whatever the elders say a hollow is, I've fed her at my own fire 11 years and found nothing ill in her yet." The king listened to all of this with his head tilted, as though it were a rather charming song. Then he smiled. "Discipline?" he repeated, tasting the word. "Master Alder, I do sincerely hope you weren't proposing to discipline my mate under your own roof. I should take it very personally." The fire popped. Nobody breathed. "Your Majesty," Alder said carefully, "she is a hollow. She has no scent. There is no wolf in the kingdom who can be your mate less than this one, with respect. Because there is no wolf in the kingdom, the Heartwood can read less. Whatever you caught tonight, it cannot have been her. And yet." Emeric spread his hands, the picture of a reasonable man baffled by his own good fortune. "I stood at the throat of the loveliest match in 3 kingdoms, and my blood said nothing at all. Then a scent came out of the dark that I have no name for, and have never met, and every part of me that has ever been an alpha stood up and said, 'There, that one.'" He looked at Sorrel, and the delight in his face did not touch the gray of his eyes, which were doing something else entirely. Watching her, the way she watched a thicket she suspected of holding a deer. It simply told a truth nobody in that hollow wanted. "My apologies to the Sunder Coast, but you cannot bind a man to the wrong woman, because the right one had the poor manners to hide in a tree." "The Sunder Coast will call it an insult," Alder said, and there was real fear under it now. The fear of a man who had counted soldiers for a living. "You've handed 40 years of peace back to the sea, Your Majesty, over a huntress. There are houses in your own court that have wanted the Sunder match dead in the water for their own reasons, and tonight you did it for them and put a bow on it. They'll be lighting candles." Something flickered at the back of the king's eyes at that. "Quick there," and gone, filed away. And Sorrel, who spent her life reading the small tells of frightened animals, marked it without knowing yet what it meant. He knew that already, she thought. He knew exactly which houses would be lighting candles. That didn't surprise him at all. "Then they'll be disappointed to find I've simply traded one alliance for another," the king said smoothly. "A man's mate is a man's mate. Who would dare call the Heartwood's own choosing an insult?" Sorrel understood the shape of the trap in the same breath she understood she was already inside it. "Deny it, I am hollow. There was no scent. This is a lie." And she was only a bad omen who had profaned a royal binding, and the law for that was written and waiting. Allow it, and the whole monstrous accident turned holy, not an omen but a mate, not a crime but fate, and no elder alive would take a blade to the woman the Heartwood had named for the king. He had reached into the worst night of her life and handed her the one story that could keep her breathing. She hated, with a clean and startling force, how badly she wanted to take it. Why? She heard herself say. Because, apparently, she could not be trusted near a king with her mouth open. "Would you lie for me?" the court would have gasped. Alder made a sound like a man swallowing his own heart. The king only looked pleased, as if she'd passed a test he hadn't announced. "You'll come to the keep tomorrow," he said, ignoring the question entirely. "I won't." It was out before her sense could stop it. "Your Majesty, with respect. I'm a hollow and a hunter. I don't know which fork murders which meat. I'd shame you inside an hour, and whatever game this is, You've picked the worst possible piece to play it with. Send me north. Say the omen was dealt with quietly. Everyone gets what they want, and no one has to look at me. Everyone gets what they want, the king repeated, and for the first time, the humor went thin over something that sounded almost tired. What a novel outcome that would be. No, I'm afraid I need you exactly where everyone can look at you, Sorrel. A mate hidden away looks like a lie. A mate at my side looks like a fact. And I have gone to a great deal of trouble tonight to purchase a fact. He straightened, and the ease flowed back over him like water closing over a stone. I'll send someone at midday. Wear whatever you like, though I'm given to understand it's traditional to make an effort when one is newly and publicly betrothed to a monarch. He turned for the door, then paused on the threshold, and the easy warmth slid off him like a cloak. And for one heartbeat, what stood in the lodge was something older and far more careful. He came back to her, close, and dropped his voice until it was meant for her alone and no one else in that room could have caught it. We both know I didn't catch a scent tonight, little hollow, he murmured. You haven't got one to catch. Which leaves the rather more interesting question of what I did catch, and why I'd tear my own kingdom's truce in half, rather than let it walk out of that hollow. Unremarked, his eyes moved over her face, quick and reading. Sleep on that. I have. Tomorrow. Then. And then he was gone into the frost, and the hoofbeats picked up and faded, and Sorrel stood in the wreck of the plan Alder had built with the king's impossible words still hanging in the air where his mouth had been, and no idea in the world what any of them meant. The someone the king sent at midday turned out to be a boy of perhaps 12, mounted on a pony too grand for him, who took one look at Sorrel in her hunting leathers and opened his mouth to say something about a gown, and then, wisely, closed it again. She had decided on the leathers at dawn. If Emmerich wanted a fact standing at his side, he could have the true one, a huntress with a knife on her hip and mud on her boots, and not some painted thing pretending to be highborn. It was the only weapon she had left, and she meant to use it. The keep swallowed her whole. She had never been past its outer yard, and now she was walked through it like a prize. Down halls hung with the pelts of animals she could have named the ages of, past courtiers who fell silent as she passed and found their voices again the instant her back was turned. She caught the word hollow 4 times before she stopped counting. She caught omen twice. She kept her chin level and her hands loose and let them look, because a hunted thing that runs is a hunted thing that dies. And she had already run, once, this week. They did not take her to a banquet. They took her to a cold stone stair in the disused west wing, where the king was waiting with 2 guards and a man she did not know. Narrow, silver-haired, dressed in the deep red of the council, with a smile that arrived a half-second before it was wanted. My betrothed, Emmerich said, as though presenting her at a feast. Sorrel, this is Lord Rainer, who keeps my accounts, my secrets, and a truly alarming number of my keys. Rainer, be charming. She reads people for a living, and you'll not fool her. So you may as well not try. Your Majesty flatters us both. Rainer bowed to, precisely, the depth a hollow was owed, and not a finger lower. Though I confess I'd expected the king's fated mate to be, forgive me, somewhat more legible. Yes, Sorrel said. People generally do. It's the one thing about me that's never disappointed anyone. They expect to find nothing, and there I am. Nothing exactly as promised, Emmerich laughed. A real one, surprised out of him and quickly bitten back. Rainer's smile held, but something behind it recalculated, and Sorrel filed him under dangerous, and knows it. A man who kept the king's keys and had not flinched at the word died, the way an honest man flinched and turned her attention to the stair, because the stair was why she was here. She could smell nothing, of course. She never could, but she had spent her life learning to see what other wolves only smelled, and what she saw made the fine hairs rise along her arms. Someone died here, she said. The yard went quiet. Emmerich's easy face did not change, but the guards did. 2 weeks ago, Sorrel went on, crouching, laying her palm flat against the third step from the bottom, without touching the pale scrubbed patch at its center. Here. They cleaned the blood but not the stone under it. See how the green's darker? It drank deep. That's a lot of blood from one body, or some from several. And they carried him down, not up. The scuffs go toward the door. She looked at the wall, the angle, the single high arrow slit. He was put here, waiting, and whoever he was waiting for came down these stairs in the dark, and didn't come down them alone. She stood, wiping her hand on her thigh. You want to know if I'm worth the fact you paid for. That's the answer. Someone with a key to this wing set a man to kill someone who walks it a fortnight ago, and you scrubbed the stone and told no one. Who was it meant for, Your Majesty? For a long moment, the only sound was the wind in the arrow slit. You see? Arik said softly to Rainer, and there was nothing playful left in it. I told you she'd not be fooled. He did not answer her question. He never, she would learn, answered the first time. Instead he came down the stair, to stand beside her, closer than a king had any business standing, and looked at the scrubbed step, as though it had personally disappointed him. Walk it with me, he said, the whole wing. Tell me what else the stones remember. I've a great deal of blood I can't account for, and a nose full of 100 frightened liars, and not one person in this. Keep. I can trust to look at a thing, and simply tell me what it is. A pause. Until, it seems, a woman I have known for a day and a half, and so she walked it. She had meant to hate every step. Instead, something in her chest loosened, the way it did when she stepped off a road and onto a trail. This she knew. She read him the corridor, a second waiting place, abandoned, a door whose lock had been picked and not forced so by someone patient, a boot scrape at a servant's turn that said the killers knew which passages had no watch. This one didn't come in over a wall, she told him, crouched at the turn. This one already lived here, or was let in by someone who did. You're not hunting an enemy, Your Majesty. You're hunting a guest. Rainer trailed them, saying little, and Emmerich listened the way no one in her life had ever listened to her, as if her every word were a coin he was biting to test. And what, Rainer asked mildly, from a careful distance behind them, does the King's Hollow make of the fact that no scent was ever found at any of it? 3 attempts, not a trace on the air. Even a careful killer fears, and fear reeks. He let it hang. One begins to wonder whether the thing hunting His Majesty is quite as scentless as, say, present company. It was neatly done, a knife wrapped in silk, laid on the table where the king would have to see it. Emmerich did not so much as turn his head. If you're accusing my betrothed of hunting me, Rainer, do it plainly, and watch her explain why she'd save a man she meant to kill. Rainer only smiled, but the seed was planted, and sorrow felt it take root in every courtier's face they passed after. They came out onto the west rampart as the light was failing, and it was there, with the cold coming up off the fields and the first stars pricking through, that Sorrel stopped walking, not because of a track, because of a wrongness, a rope where no rope should be, drawn taut at ankle height across the walk, so fine and so dark she'd have missed it if she read the world by nose, like everyone else, and not by eye. Don't move, she said. Emmerich, one stride from it, did not move. She followed the line with her gaze across the walk, through a murder hole in the parapet, to the black shape crouched in the machicellation beyond, and the fat ugly outline of a loaded wall crossbow trained on the exact spot the king would have stood the instant his boot took the rope. Her body decided before her mind did. She hit him low and hard, all her weight into his hip, and they went down together onto the stone as the bolt tore through the space where his throat had been and buried itself in the door behind with a sound like an axe in green wood. Was that, Emmerich said from underneath her quite calmly, for me? Stay down! She was already up, knife out, moving toward the murder hole. And the dark shape was already gone, over the far side, a rope hissing, feet hitting the outer ward and running, not panic. Fast and quiet and gone, a professional cutting losses. She let him go. You did not leave the king on an open wall to chase a shadow you would not catch. She turned back. Emmerich had got himself up on one elbow and was looking at her, and he was not white, and he was not shaking, and he was not, she realized with a slow, cold turn of the stomach, remotely surprised. You knew, she said. You walked me out here at dusk onto an open wall and you knew. He did not deny it, which was worse than any lie. I had a suspicion the wall was watched, Emmerich admitted, letting her haul him upright by a forearm that was, she noted distantly, absurdly solid under her grip. I did not have a suspicion it was armed. Truly, Sorrel, if I'd known there was a wall crossbow, I'd have worn a better coat to die in. He brushed grit from the better coat he was in fact wearing. You've a genius for ruining a man's plans. First my binding, now my assassination. Is there any ceremony of mine you don't intend to interrupt? You're not funny. I'm a little funny. You used yourself as bait. She heard her own voice climb, and did not care. You brought a hollow onto a wall to see if the thing hunting you would take the shot because a hollow is expendable and won't be missed. And if I'd read the rope a half-breath slower, you'd have a dead huntress and a dead king. And a very tidy I brought you, he said, and the humor dropped clean out of him again. That trick he had of going from weather to bedrock in a heartbeat. Because you are the only person who has walked that wing in a fortnight and told me the truth of it instead of the truth I'd find comfortable. I did not think you would take a bolt for me. I did not, if we're being precise, think you'd take anything for me. You've made your opinion of this arrangement wonderfully plain. He looked at her, and something moved behind the gray that she could not name. And yet you put your body between me and a loosed bolt without a heartbeat's thought. Why did you do that, Sorrel? You, of all people, owe me nothing. She had no answer that would survive being spoken aloud. She let go of his arm. They gave her rooms that night, real rooms, in the royal wing with a bed she did not sleep in, because she spent the dark hours sitting against the door with her knife across her knees, listening to a keep that groaned and settled like a living thing and turning the day over and over. Because it did not add up, and things that did not add up were the only kind of thing Sorrel had ever fully trusted. Item, someone inside the keep had tried 3 times to kill the king, and each attempt had known his movements, his passages, his unwatched turns. This was no foreign blade over the wall. This was a hand that held keys. Item. The king knew he was being hunted, had known for a month, and had told no one. Not his guard, not his council, not even, she suspected, Raynor, of the alarming number of keys. A king who hides the knife at his own back is a king who suspects the hand holding it sits at his own table. Item. And this was the one that would not let her sleep. She had cut the trip rope loose before they left the wall and coiled it into her pocket, out of a habit older than thought, and now, by candlelight, she turned it in her fingers and felt the world tilt, very quietly, on its axis. The rope had been fixed at the parapet with a knot. A good knot, a specific knot, 2 round turns and a locked bite, dressed so it would hold a hard jerk and then spill clean when you wanted it gone. It was not a soldier's knot. It was not a sailor's. It was a trapper's knot, the kind you used on a spring snare when you wanted the line to release, the instant the prey took it. She knew that knot. She had tied it 10,000 times. Every hunter Alder had ever trained tied it exactly, precisely that way, because Alder had beaten it into their hands one cold winter at a time, and no one outside the lodge tied it at all. Sorrel sat very still and looked at the little coil of rope and felt something she had no name for, something with cold feet, walk the length of her spine. Then she did what people do when a thought is too large and too dreadful to hold. She set it down. She told herself a keep was full of men who'd learned rope from all sorts. She put the coil in the bottom of her pack under her spare bowstrings, where she would not have to look at it, and she did not think about it again for 11 days. She would come to consider those the most expensive 11 days of her life. The days themselves were not what she'd braced for. She had expected to be paraded and mocked. Instead, She was of all things used and used well. Emeric gave her the run of the West Wing and the freedom to ask any question of anyone, and she took him at his word and made herself insufferable with it. She interviewed the scullery. She counted the keys against the ledger of who held them and found the ledger 3 keys short. She walked the outer ward at the hours the attacks had come and mapped the blind spots. No one had thought to map because no one had thought like a thing that gets hunted for a living. And Emeric was there for a great deal more of it than a king with a kingdom to run had any excuse to be. He would appear at her shoulder in the map room at midnight with 2 cups of something hot and a question he already half knew the answer to. He would lean in the doorway of the armory while she worked and watch her with that unhurried attention until she lost the thread of her own counting and had to start again, furious. At 1, he asked her about the lodge. He asked her about the hunt, about tracking, about what the world was like to someone who moved through it, unsmelled and unseen, and he listened to the answers as though she were telling him something no one had ever bothered to. "You keep looking at me," she said one night, not looking at him. "Yes," said the king, entirely unashamed. "It's the most restful thing in this whole poisoned keep. Do you know, I can't hear you at all. Everyone else in this place, I walk in and I'm drowning in them. Every fear and want and calculation rolling off them like heat off a road, and I have to stand there and smile and pretend I can't smell exactly how much each of them would like me dead or wed or gone." He turned his cup in his hands, "And then there's you, quiet as snow, the one person in the realm I have to actually ask." He smiled, but it had gone soft and strange at the edges. "Do you have the faintest idea how loud it is? You're the first silence I've had in 9 years." Sorrel looked up before she could stop herself and found him already looking back. And the thing that passed between them in the low light of the map room had nothing restful about it at all. It could not go on, of course. She told herself so nightly with great firmness, in the narrow hours against the door. A hollow did not fall for a king, a hunted thing did not fall for the man, using it as bait. And a woman with any sense at all did not let herself be turned soft by a monarch who lied for a living and had not once, in 11 days, answered the first question she asked him. She was still telling herself so when he took her back to the Heartwood. It was her own doing in the end. She had gone to him with the map of the blind spots and the ledger 3 keys short and said flatly that she could not protect a man who kept his own secrets from her, and that if he wanted to live he would show her the one place in the keep he had never let her walk, his own chambers where the first blood had been spilled. And Emeric had looked at her for a long, considering moment, and then said, "No, but I'll show you something better. Bring your cloak. It's cold where we're going." Where they were going was the sacred hollow, empty now, the torches long dead, the great black tree, standing alone under a sky gone thick with stars. He led her in past the broken wall she had fled through. He knew about the broken wall, of course he knew, and stopped in the ring of heaved stone where 200 people had watched him ruin a truce for her, and where she had first understood that being seen could feel exactly like falling. "This is where you were," he said, and walked unerring to the root gallery she had hidden in. "Here. I've stood in this spot every night for 11 nights, trying to work out what I felt, and I still haven't the words for it, so you'll have to forgive me if I make a mess of this." He turned to face her in the starlight, and the performance was gone. All of it, the charm and the ease and the arch amusement stripped away, and what stood under the heartwood was just a tired man who had been holding something up alone for a very long time. "I told you, no one had ever told the boy king he was to blame for anything. That's not quite true. No one has ever told me anything true because they all want something, and I can smell the wanting. And so every word out of every mouth in my life has come to me pre-rotted with the reason behind it. 9 years of that. And then I stood at my own binding beside the loveliest lie in 3 kingdoms, drowning in her ambition and her father's ambition and the whole hollow's ambition, and I turned my head, and there was a silence in the dark. One clean silence in the whole screaming world. His voice roughened. I didn't catch your scent, Sorrel. You're right. There's nothing to catch. I caught the absence of everyone else. I felt, for the first time in 9 years, what it is to stand near a person and not be able to tell what they want from me. And God's help me, I would have torn down more than a truce to keep it. Sorrel stood very still. The cold was in her boots, and the stars were very bright, and her whole careful, firm, sensible argument had gone somewhere she could not find it. That's not a reason to marry someone, she managed. That I'm quiet. That I'm nothing. To your nose, that's not a bond. That's just me being broken in a way that happens to suit you. You are not broken. He said it with a sudden, startling heat, closing the space between them in one stride. You are the only whole thing I've met in 9 years. Everyone else is a smell and a scheme. You're a person, and I have to earn every single thing you'll give me. And do you know, I haven't wanted anything this badly. Since I was a boy who still thought being king would be, he stopped. He was very close now. She could see the pulse in his throat, the exact place the bolt would have gone. Tell me to go back to the keep, he said quietly, and I'll go, and I'll never say another word of this, and you'll only ever be my clever huntress who keeps me breathing. I'll manage it. I've managed harder. His hand came up, slow, giving her every moment in the world to step back. But if you don't want me to go, Sorrel, for once in your life, don't run. Just this once. Stay where you are, and let me. And here was the truth. She had been out running since the wall, since the map room, since a stranger's gray eyes had found her in the dark, and alone among every soul she'd ever met, had looked pleased. All her life she had been the thing that made a room go quiet. The omen. The tree could not read, and the pack could not love. Needed for her hands, and never once wanted for herself. And now, a king stood under the very tree that had rejected her since birth, and told her that the emptiness they'd all despised was the one thing in the world he could rest against. It was either the cruelest lie she'd ever been told, or the only true thing anyone had ever said to her. And standing in the starlight she found, to her horror, that she no longer had it in her to run and find out which. She kissed him. She would never afterward be able to say which of them moved, only that the arguing stopped, and the cold stopped, and the whole loud aching world stopped, and there was nothing left in it but the king's mouth on hers, warm and certain and stunned, and his hands coming up to frame her face as if she were something that might yet bolt. She fisted her hands in the front of his coat, instead. Coat. She kissed him the way she did everything she'd decided to do, completely, with her whole weight, past the point of taking it back, and felt the sound he made break against her lips, felt 11 days of held breath let go all at once. And then, under the black tree that had never once been able to read her, in the arms of a man who had blown apart his own kingdom because she was silent to him, Sorrel felt something she had gone her entire life, without a thread. Fine as spider silk, warm, drawn taut in the dead center of her chest and running. She knew it the way you know, a wound is deep before it hurts, running straight out of her and into him. A thread where a hollow had no business having anything at all. She could feel him at the far end of it. The shape of what he felt pouring back down the line into her. The want, yes, but under it, a relief so vast and so undefended, it frightened her more than the crossbow had. Sorrel wrenched back with a gasp, one hand flying to her sternum, and stared at the king of Cairnwold in the starlight, with her heart slamming against her ribs. What, she whispered, was that? And Merrick, who could catch no scent from her, who had built his whole impossible lie on the fact that there was nothing there to catch, went absolutely white, and breathed. You felt it too. They did not go back to the keep for a long time. They sat out the rest of that night in a keeper's hut at the edge of the sacred wood, in front of a fire she built, because a king turned out to be useless at it, close enough that the thread hummed between them like a plucked string. Neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, because the thing they were both thinking was impossible. He said it first, of course. He was braver than her about the wrong things. A hollow cannot bond. He said it to the rafters, one hand moving slow through her hair. It's the first thing they teach the pups. No scent, no thread, no mate. It is the whole reason your life has been what it's been. His hand went still. And yet, I can feel you at the other end of a line. I have felt for no one, ever, and you can feel me. Which means, one of two things is true. Sorrel and I have been a king, long enough to distrust the pleasant one. He turned his head, and in the firelight his eyes had gone careful. Again, the bedrock, under the weather. Either the priests are liars, and a hollow can love after all. Or you were never hollow at all, and someone, a very long time ago, took a great deal of trouble to make you believe you were. She should have heard it then. She would flay herself for it later. But she was warm, and she was wanted, and for the first time in her whole scentless life, she felt like a person and not an omen. And so she let him kiss the thought quiet, and told herself he was only a man reaching for reasons in the dark. The days after were the best of her life, which was how she knew, in the end, to be suspicious of them. He stopped performing when it was only the two of them. The King of Cairnwold, who could not walk his own hall without drowning in 100 wants, could sit in silence beside a woman he could not smell and simply be. And the being drew something out of him she suspected no one else had ever seen. He told her about the brother who should have been king and had died at 17, leaving the crown to a boy who smiled because smiling was armor. He told her he had not slept a whole night in 9 years. She who had spent her life certain she had nothing anyone could want, found herself with the one thing this man had never been given, a place to set the weight down, and she gave him things back she had never given anyone. She took him out past the walls at dawn and taught him to read a deer trail, and laughed, actually laughed, a sound that startled them both, when the most powerful alpha in 3 kingdoms went down hard on his royal backside in the frost, trying to move as quietly as she did. She showed him the old scar on her forearm, from a boar that should have killed her at 15, and did not flinch when his thumb traced it, and understood dimly that she was handing over the map of herself, a landmark at a time, and could no longer make herself stop. The thread between them thickened by the day. Some nights she woke in the dark, certain of his dreams, before she was certain of her own name. But he had also gone secretive in a way she felt through the thread and could not name a locked drawer in him, a shuttered room he went into alone, moments where the warmth would ebb and something cold and calculating would move behind his eyes and then be smoothed away before she could name it. She told herself it was the crown's business. She told herself a king was allowed his silences, that a man hunted in his own house had a right to a locked drawer or two. She told herself a great many things that season, and every one of them was a fire she built to keep from looking at the dark just past its light. The betrothal feast was Raynor's idea, or so Emmerich said, a public presentation of the king's chosen mate with the Sunder Coast's envoy, a sea-weathered lord named Merrick, seated in the place of honor to prove the crown bore his people no insult. Sorrel stood through it in blue silk, hating every thread of it, reading the room the only way she could, by eye. Which was why, when a servant she did not know carried the king's cup up the high table with his thumb hooked over the rim, in a way no trained servant's ever was, she was already moving. She could not smell the poison. She would never smell anything, but she had spent a life watching how hands lied, and that hand was lying. And she knocked the cup from Emmerich's fingers a breath before it reached his mouth. It shattered on the stone. The wine ran black in the candlelight, and where it touched the spilled salt it hissed and grayed, and the whole high table saw it, and the envoy Merrick half rose with his hand on his knife. An accident, Emmerich said, into a silence you could have drowned in. He was smiling. He was already smiling. Gods, how did he do it? Clumsy of me, Sit, my lord. Please. The wine's gone off, that's all. His hand found Sorrel's wrist under the table and gripped, hard. A single word pressed into her skin. Nothing. She let him have his nothing. She smiled, and sat and played the startled bride, while a king talked a room full of frightened wolves, back down, off the edge of a war. And she hated it, and she understood it, and underneath the understanding, a small, cold voice was already asking. He slipped away before the sweets, told her to wait, told her, with his mouth against her hair so the table saw only tenderness, that he would explain everything tomorrow, and that tonight she was to trust him and stay. She gave him the length of a slow count of 50. Then she followed, the way she'd followed game her whole life, silent and scentless down a stair no one had thought to watch, to a small archive room deep under the keep where a light burned that should not have. And she stood in the doorway and watched the king of Cairnwold, who had told her to wait, bent over a table of old ledgers with a hunter's masking charm in one hand and her own name in the other. He looked up. For a long, weightless moment, neither of them moved. Sorrel, he said very carefully, I need you to let me say this in the right order. The right order, Sorrel repeated. Her voice came out flat and very far away. You told me to trust you. You told me to wait. And you came down here to a locked room to read my name out of an old book. She stepped inside. The little masking charm in his hand was a knot of dried greyleaf and river clay, bound in gut, and she knew it the way you know your own hands. Because there was one exactly like it, older, sewn into the lining of the pack she had carried since she was 9. Say it plainly, your majesty. You've had your fortnight of not answering. I've earned plain. So he gave it to her plainly, and every plain word took something out of her she would not get back. He had known, he said for 2 months, that someone inside his own house was bleeding the kingdom. Grain and coin and steel, meant for the border garrisons, gone quietly upstream into the coffers of a cousin's claim. The house of Vashel, who had never forgiven a dead brother's crown for landing on a boy. He had known there were men in his walls who killed and left no scent, which was a thing no ordinary killer could do, which meant a thing he had refused to believe until he could no longer. He had needed, desperately, one ally the conspiracy could not read and could not trace and could not have planted, because anyone in his court with a scent could be scented, weighed, bought, or feared. And then, at his own binding, into the middle of the worst month of his reign, had walked the single, most untraceable person in the realm. A hollow, unreadable, unplaceable. A blade no enemy could see the edge of. So you claimed me, Sorrel said. The thread between them had gone to ice. The scent, the fate, the tree choosing me, all of it. You needed a spy no one could smell, and I fell into your lap, out of a tree, and you built me a fairy tale on the spot, so I'd stay close and grateful and useful. That is how it began. He did not look away from her, and she would give him that much for the rest of her life. He did not look away. I will not stand here and lie to you now to make it hurt less, because lying to you is the thing I am trying to stop having done. Yes, I claimed a tool, and then the tool turned out to be the only person who has ever made the noise in my head go quiet. And somewhere in a keeper's hut with the fire you built, I stopped being able to tell where the strategy ended, and his voice cracked, actually cracked, the smooth thing in him breaking on a stone. It stopped being cover a long time before I had the courage to notice. Don't. She could barely breathe. Whose name is in that book, Emmerich? You've told me everything except the one thing you came down here for. Whose? He set the ledger down where she could see it. She did not want to look. She looked. It was a masking roll, a hunter's record, a list of the scent-charmed, the men and women trained to move through the world, leaving nothing on the air, a craft the lodge kept quiet, because a wolf who left no scent was a wolf who could do a great deal the law preferred wolves could not. She knew the hand it was written in. She had learned her letters from that hand. And at the top of the roll, in the careful, patient script of the man who had pulled a scentless 9-year-old out of a ditch and told her every day for 11 years that she was an omen the world would never want, was Alder's name. And below it, third from the top, was hers. No, she said. He didn't find you hollow, Sorrel. Amaric's voice had gone terribly gentle. The voice she'd watched him use on frightened lords, and she hated that he was using it on her and understood exactly why. He made you hollow. He took a child with a scent like anyone's, and he masked it so deep you grew up, believing you'd been born empty. A scentless child is the perfect thing. No bond to betray her, no trail to follow, no one who'll want her enough to ask where she goes. He didn't raise a daughter. He raised a knife that no one would ever miss. And he told you that you were nothing, so that the only person you'd ever be loyal to was the man who deigned to keep an omen. He drew a breath. The men who've been killing my people leave no scent. They tie their trip lines in a trapper's knot. You knew that 11 days ago. I watched you go white on that wall, and I watched you decide not to know it because the alternative was this room, and I could not make you come into this room until you were ready to survive it. And there it was, the knot, the coil, at the bottom of her pack, under the bowstrings, the thing she had set down because it was too large to hold. She had known. Some hunted animal in her had known on the wall and had chosen 11 days of a warm fire over one cold true thing, and the shame of that was worse than any blade. You should have told me. It came out of her in pieces. You knew what I was, and you let me. You let me build you a fire. I didn't tell you, Emmerich said. For the same reason, you put that rope in the bottom of your pack, because you would not have believed me. Because he is the one thing in your life that has never once been a lie, and if I had said his name a day too early, you would have walked out of this keep, and straight back to him, and he would have known I knew, and you would have died in the woods with a trapper's knot around your throat, and I would have, he stopped, mastered it. I needed you to find the edges of it yourself. A hollow can't be read, so I couldn't scent whether you were his, but a woman who was part of it would have worked me from the first night. And you spent a fortnight trying to send yourself north, so a king wouldn't have to look at you. That's how I knew. You didn't dissemble. You've never once dissembled. You don't know how. Sorrel stood in the cold light of the archive, with her whole life coming apart, along seams she had never known were there. Every grievance she carried, that the crown was careless, that the high-born discarded people like her, that no one would ever want a hollow, and she was a fool to wish it. She could hear them now in another voice, older, patient, spoken over a lodge fire 100 winters deep. They'll never want you, girl. Only I want you. Stay close. She had thought they were her thoughts. She had carried Alder's grievances in her own mouth for 11 years, and called them her nature. I have to go, she heard herself say. Sorrel. You. Used. Me. She was already at the door, and the thread between them was screaming, and she shut it the way she'd shut everything, hard, from the inside. And he made me. And the only difference between the two of you is that he had 11 years, and you only had a fortnight. Congratulations, Your Majesty. You're the second man to look at a hollow and see a useful thing. She did not slam the door. She was proud of that. Later, in the way you are proud of very small things when you have nothing else, she simply walked out into the dark and left the King of Cairnwold alone with the book that had her name in it. He was waiting for her at the top of the stair. Of course he was. She came up out of the dark with her whole heart in pieces, and there was Alder, big and gray and solid as a doorframe, exactly where he had always been every time the world had knocked her down, and her feet took her 3 steps toward him before her mind could catch them. 11 years of a body learning where safety stood. It is a hard thing to unteach in a single flight of stairs. There she is, Alder said, and opened his arms. And it was so nearly the same thing the king had said in the lodge that she stopped dead. You knew he'd catch me at the binding, she said. Something moved across the old man's face, surprise, quickly folded away, and under it a flicker of calculation she had never once let herself see in 11 years, and could not now unsee. "Child, you're shaking. Come away from here. Whatever that man has told you, you masked me." Her voice did not shake, which surprised them both. "When I was small, you took my scent and you told me I was born without one. You told me I was an omen, so I'd never dare want anything but you." For a moment, she thought he would deny it, and some starved thing in her chest begged him to make it a lie so she could go on being the girl he'd rescued. He didn't. He looked at her, and the warmth ran out of his face, like water out of a cracked basin, and what was left underneath was patient and cold. And had she understood far too late, always been there. "I gave you a life," Alder said. "I gave you a purpose. You were going to be the finest blade this kingdom never saw. Instead, you climbed a tree to moon over a wedding and let a lonely king make a pet of you." He sighed, a teacher disappointed in a promising pupil. "But it's not too late. Listen to me. He's poisoned you against me with pretty stories, but you're still the only one who can end this cleanly. The Sunder envoy is still in the keep, Lord Merrick. If the king's own mate, his fated hollow, chosen by the Heartwood itself, went to Merrick tonight and swore she'd seen Emmerich murder a man on the west stair with his own hands, seen him plotting to break the truce and take the Sunder coast by the sword, that's a lie." "It's a better king," Alder said, with the flat conviction of a man who had told himself so for years. "Vashel will steady the realm. There are good houses ready, and it has to come from you, girl, because you're the one soul in that keep no one can smell a lie on. That's what I made you for." His voice gentled, and that was the cruelest part, that even now it could gentle, and some ninth winter part of her still leaned toward it. "You think I don't know they hurt you, all of them. The midwives who called you an omen, the pups who wouldn't share a fire, the crown that let a whole class of people be born disposable. I'm the one who taught you to see it clearly. Everything you know about how this kingdom throws away the low and keeps the high. You learned at my knee, and you learned it because it's true. One true-seeming word from the king's own hollow, and the boy falls without a war, and you and I go home and finish the work." He held out his hand, the same broad, scarred hand that had taught her every knot she knew. "Come home." And Sorrel, who could read the small tells of frightened animals, looked at the hand and the face and the story, and found the thread that did not pull true: a man on the west stair. But the blood on the west stair was a fortnight old, and Alder had been at the high camps a fortnight ago. She'd sent him grain herself. He hadn't seen it. He was describing a thing he'd only have known if he'd ordered it. The story was wrong at the root, the way a snare is wrong when the grass lies against the grain. And once she saw the one wrong thing, she saw all of it. The knot, the masking, the scentless killers, the ledger with her name third from the top. Emmerich had told her the truth in a cold room and asked her to survive it. Alder was holding out his hand and asking her to help him kill a king. So she did the only thing 11 years at his side had taught her that he had never accounted for. She lied to him. It cost her more than the truth ever had. "All right," she said, and let her voice break, which was not hard. "All right. Take me to Merrick. I'll tell him what I saw." The old man's eyes softened with something that might once have been love, and she now knew to be ownership. "Good girl," said Alder, and it landed on her like a brand. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, the way the king had done at the feast, and turned her toward the east wing, where a sea lord waited with the fate of 2 kingdoms in his gift. And Sorrel walked beside her maker toward the longest room of her life, with nothing in her hands but the truth, and one chance to throw his own trap shut on him. And one wrong word, she knew, would light a war that would burn from the mountains to the sea. The doors of the council room stood open. Merrick was there, gray and grim at the long table. Raynor was there, and half the court, and brought in under guard. Ashen, alone, the king. And Merrick's head came up when she entered on Alder's arm. And for half a heartbeat she watched him understand it exactly wrong. The hollow he'd used, walking in beside the man who'd made her come to bury him. The light went out of his face. It was the worst thing she had ever done, and she had not even done anything yet. Alder bowed to the envoy, grave and gentle, the very picture of a loyal old soldier sick at heart. "My lord, Merrick, it shames me, past speaking, to bring you this. But the king has wronged you, and there is a witness his own crown cannot silence." He turned. The whole room turned with him to the scentless woman in the doorway. He smiled at her, warm as a hearth, certain as sunrise. "Sorrel, tell his lordship what you saw." Every face in the room turned to her, and Sorrel understood that this was the same room, in the end, as the one she'd started in a crowd. A powerful man, certain of the outcome, a hollow in the doorway, with everyone waiting to hear what she was. Only this time, she had climbed into no one's roots by accident. This time she had walked in with her eyes open, and she knew precisely what she meant to do. "I saw nothing," she said, "because there was nothing to see. The king never touched a man on the west stair." She turned from Alder to the Sea Lord, and pitched her voice to carry to the farthest wall. "But you should ask my Lord Merrick how the master of the hunt comes to describe a murder he was 40 miles away for. The blood on that stair is a fortnight old. Alder was at the high camps a fortnight past, I know, because I sent his grain up the mountain with my own hands. He cannot have seen what he swears he saw. A man can only describe a killing he did not witness, if he is the one who ordered it done." The room went very still. Alder's arm turned to iron under her hand. "She's distraught," he said smoothly. "The king has broken her, my lord, poured lies in her ear. Search his quarters." Sorrel did not raise her voice. She had learned that from watching Emeric. "Now tonight, while he stands here and cannot reach them, you'll find a masking roll in his own hand, a list of hunters he sent charmed to move through this. Keep leaving nothing on the air. The men who have tried 3 times to kill your host, my lord, and left no trace, because a scent-masked wolf leaves none." She lifted her chin and did the hardest thing she had ever done, which was to hand a room full of strangers the truth of herself. "I know the craft is real, because I am the proof of it. He masked me as a child and named me an omen, and I believed him for 11 years. My name is third on that roll. Send men who can read. It is all written down. Traitors are so often tidy. Enough." And there it was. The grave old soldier gone in an instant, the warmth burned off, and what stood in its place was the cold, patient thing that had always been under the fire. Alder's calm, cracked straight down the middle. "You ungrateful little—" He moved on her fast, faster than a gray-haired man had any right to, and the blade came out of his sleeve, the way she'd seen 100 blades come out of 100 sleeves, because he was the one who had taught her to watch for it. That was his whole mistake. In the end he had trained the eyes now reading him. She did not think. She turned into him instead of away, caught the knife arm at the wrist, the way he drilled into her over 10,000 cold mornings, used his own weight against him the way he'd taught her to use a stag's, and put the master of the hunt face down on the council room stone with his arm locked, screaming behind him and her knee in the small of his back. She brought her mouth close to his ear in the ringing silence, so only he would hear it. "You taught me where the blade lives," she said. "You should have remembered I was always your best pupil." Then the guards had him, and the moment broke, and it was done. Merrick's men came back within the hour, with the masking roll and a strong box of Vashel gold and enough poison to drop an ox, and a sea lord, who had come to the keep half a breath from war, went home instead, with a truce mended and a debt to a hollow. The rod Alder had worked into the guard for a decade was cut out over the following weeks, root and stem. Cairnwald would say, later, that the boy king had finally become the true one, and that a scentless huntress had handed him the kingdom on the night she might have taken it from him instead. But that was later. That night, When the room had emptied, and the torches guttered, there was only the two of them, and a distance between them that no bond could carry across. "You saved me," Emmerich said. He looked wrecked and young, and afraid to come closer. "Even after Sorrel, you walked in on his arm, and I thought, and you still, I saved the lawful king from a traitor," she said, and made her voice a flat, cold thing, because it was that or break. That's all it was. I'd have done the same for a king I'd never met. Don't dress it up as forgiveness. The bond is real. You feel it. I know you feel it. It doesn't matter if it's real. She was already at the door, and the thread was hauling at her ribs, and she shut it, and shut it, and shut it. A real thread doesn't undo a fortnight of being handled. You looked me in the eye every single day, and let me build my whole foolish heart on a lie you'd chosen on purpose. And a bond doesn't fix that any more than his 11 years of fires fixed what he did. You're both men who found a hollow useful. He just had longer to practice. His face fell away into something ruined, and she made herself watch it, and she made herself say the last of it. "I'm glad you'll live. You'll be a good king. I can't trust you. I don't know that I ever will again." And she left him there for the second time in one night, and told herself the wetness on her face was only the cold. They made her warden of the hunt before the month was out, Alder's own place, offered by a king who would not look at her when he gave it, because she would not let him. She was good at it. She had always known she would be. She cut out the last of the masked hunters. She rebuilt the border watch. She ran the finest hunt the kingdom had seen in a generation, and every night she went back to a warden's quarters. She did not sleep in and lay awake with a thread in her chest that would not fade, no matter how tightly she closed the door on it. Leave a bond open, and it deepens. She knew that, so she kept it shut and hoped it would starve. Emmerich did not make it easy. He did not grovel. She would have known how to arm herself against groveling. He simply, patiently, refused to stop being decent to her. He gave her the wardenship and then let her run it, without once leaning on the debt she owed him or the debt he owed her. At the war table she now sat at, he let her win the arguments she'd won on their merits, and said nothing when the old lords bristled, which was louder than any decree. And he wrote to her. Letters in his own hand, 2 and 3 a week, left on the warden's desk where she could pretend not to have waited for them. Some were about the hunt, sober and useful, as though her honest opinion were still a thing worth having. Some were 3 lines long, one read only, "I have discovered there is no clever thing to say. I lied to you and let you love me while I did it, and being right about the danger does not make it smaller. I keep reaching for the sentence that fixes it, and there isn't one. So instead, I'll just tell you the true thing. Since you taught me the difference, I miss you past bearing, and I am sorry, and I will go on being sorry at you for as long as you'll let a letter through the door." She read that 4 times. Then she put it in the bottom of her pack, under the spare bowstrings, in the exact place she had once hidden a coiled rope she could not bear to look at. And she noticed she had done it, and hated that she'd noticed. It did not starve. And on a gray morning, near the turn of the season, standing at the edge of a frost-stiff field, with her breath clouding the air, Sorrel caught the faint green smell of crushed bracken under her boots, and went utterly, perfectly still. Because a hollow smells nothing. A hollow has never in her life smelled anything at all. The mask was breaking. 11 years of Alder's craft, undone now that she knew to stop feeding. In the whole scented world was bleeding back into her a thread at a time. Bracken, wood smoke, the wet iron of the coming snow. For the first time in her life, the world had a smell, and she stood in the cold with her heart in her throat, and understood with a slow and terrible certainty exactly whose scent she was going to catch first. The poacher came at dawn. Her hunters had been muttering about him for a week, a hooded figure at the tree line in the gray hour, watching the warden's morning hunt from the cover of the pines, and gone before anyone could hail him. Poacher, they said. Or a spy of some broken remnant of Vashels. come to finish what Alder started. Sorrel had said nothing and set no watch, because she had begun to suspect, with a feeling she refused to name, exactly who stood so still in the trees at the hour when a hollow used to be able to hide. So on the 7th morning, she circled wide, and came up behind the pines, the way she'd come up behind game, her whole life, silent, downwind, and there, for the first time, the wind did its old honest work for her. It brought her a scent, cedar and cold iron, and something underneath that was only him, and it hit her low and molten and folded her in half because she knew it. She had felt the shape of it pouring down a thread for a season, and now here it was on the air like everyone else's, ordinary and impossible, and his. She stepped out of the trees, and there stood the king of Cairnwold, in a traveler's hood with the frost in his shoulders, caught the most powerful alpha in the land, caught red-handed, hiding in the woods to watch a woman who wouldn't speak to him. "You hid," she said, "to watch me hunt." "I did." He didn't bother to deny it, or look ashamed. He looked, if anything, glad to be caught at last. "You hid in a tree once, to watch a thing you thought you'd never be allowed. I understand the urge rather better than I used to." His breath clouded. "I gave you my word I'd stop writing, and I've kept it. But you're the only quiet I've ever had, Sorrel, and some mornings a man wants to stand near the quiet, even if he's not allowed to keep it. That's all. I'll go. I can smell you," she said. He went still, exactly the way she had gone, still in the frost-stiff field. "What? The mask is dying. It's been dying since the night I stopped believing him." She took a step toward him across the snow, and the thread between them, which she had been starving for a season, flared up bright and warm and unbearable, and, for once in her life, she let it. "For 11 years I thought I was born empty. And the first scent I ever caught, the first thing the whole world ever handed to me, was you, hiding in a tree, trying not to want me where I couldn't see." Her voice was not steady. "She let that be true, too. You caught a scent I didn't have, and blew up your whole kingdom for it. It seems only fair I should catch yours." Emeric reached up, slow, and pushed the hood back the way he had at the binding, the way that had started all of it, and this time, she did not run. This time, she closed the last of the distance herself, and when she kissed him, the thread sang and his scent wrapped round her, and every part of the world that had ever been silent to her came roaring, finally, gorgeously alive. They bound under the heartwood in the spring, and this time, no one hid in the roots, because the whole of Cairnwold came out to see it, the boy king who'd become a true one, and the hollow who hadn't been hollow after all, who had walked into a room with the power to take his crown, and had handed it back to him instead. The old tree, which had spent 300 years reading sense, met the one woman it had never been able to read, and the priest swore ever after, leaned down anyway. He wept during the vows. She'd known he would. She'd known him a long time by then. She had sworn to herself she wouldn't. And the bond gave her away in front of everyone, regardless. And he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped caring who saw. "You're bound to me now," he murmured, when it was done, forehead to hers. "No? Taking it back. I climbed a tree to watch this happen to someone else," she said. "I'm not about to take it back now. It's finally mine." For once, she did not argue.